Hello and welcome to today's virtual happy hour tour. I am Brenda with AARP Arizona. We are the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence and nearly 38 million members across the nation and approximately 900,000 right here in Arizona, we work to strengthen our communities and we advocate for what matters most to families: health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment, to name a few. In May, AARP helps consumers know what they can do to protect themselves and their loved ones from fraud. Two areas of focus will be gift cards as a form of payment and scams, and narrative change to social change. ARP is your wise friend with resources to help consumers spot and avoid scams and a fierce defender that is advocating for better protections on your behalf. Please visit us at aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. Thank you again, and with that, I will turn it over to Marshall.
Ladies and gentlemen, non-binary folk, welcome to the show. Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very own hip historian himself, Marshall Shore.
Well, hello and good evening. I want to welcome you all to Arizona History Happy Hour. I am so happy you can be here. So, I love the fact that right now we are on a variety. I mean, we're on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter. So people can watch us almost anywhere. Also, all these episodes are archived on YouTube. So well worth watching and hanging out and seeing what all is going on. So today is the 25th of May. And so, on this date, back and there was a road proposed that would go from Flagstaff all the way to the San Francisco Peaks. And so that was a scenic route. And so that was proposed that it be built today. It is also National Paper Bag Day, which I think is interesting because it kind of comes as the school year is ending, which I think is kind of interesting. It's like, hey, be sure to take your paper bag to work, to school, so that way you can save a little bit of money, make a little bit of, what's going on, so that way you can control your food a little bit better. So it is also Eat More Vegetables and Fruit Day. And so that is because I think it's also because at the end of school, but again, just eat healthier and enjoy. It also happens to be National Wine Day, which is, I think, a great way to also imbibe your wine and get maybe some fruit into your daily diet. Well, maybe not drinking wine daily. I don't want to go that route, but you get what I mean. Now, it is also National Towel Day, which basically lays fact to Douglas Adams, the writer of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In the book, it introduces a towel as a very useful object, and so fans of his, soon after his death, decided that this day should be celebrated as Towel Day. So people across the planet are posting photos of themselves with towels to commemorate Douglas Adams and his books. Now, it also is probably no shock coming from that is also Happy Geek Pride Day. Let your geek flag fly, whether you are sci-fi, fantasy, board games, video, comic books, cosplay, steampunk, zombies, whatever, and it's also here in the Valley. It is throughout there is Arizona Restaurant Week. So if you're a food geek, now is your chance to go out and try some of those restaurants. I know I've got some friends that the other day were just at Roko Accor out in Scottsdale at that Japanese restaurant. So, and I bet you can also get some wine with that as well. All right. So what can you expect from tonight's show? Well, we've always got a little bit of trivia going on. We've got From the Vault, which is something you might drive by daily and not even realize that there's a bit of history behind it. As well as we have a little bit of music history, Little Arizona, and of course, there is a beverage, and it would not be happy hour without a very special guest. And I will introduce them in just a few minutes. We've got some housekeeping to get through, so if this is your first time watching, you might wonder, who is that man and why is he on my screen? Well, my name is Marshall Shore, and I got to Arizona about 23 years ago. I was living and working in Brooklyn at a beautiful Carnegie building and decided to trade all that snow and slush for someplace sunny, that being Phoenix, Arizona. Promptly started working at a little library in South Phoenix where there was a rich oral tradition of the community. And that really got me looking at Arizona and learning about it through stories. And that's what I continue on doing today. So doing that and then promptly moving into a beautiful 1956 ranch house. Now, it was oh so many tones of beige. I am happy to say now it is seafoam and cantaloupe. Just two tones, not multi-beige. And there's what my kitchen looks like today. All that buttercream yellow tile, matching appliances, true to the era because they are the original appliances. So, all right. Now, as soon as we got here, all I kept hearing about how there was no history. But I knew that wasn't true because every time I would come across, whether it didn't matter if I was traveling on a bike, in a car, on a bus, on a scooter, whatever, all I heard, it was like everywhere I went, I kept running into so many amazing people, places, and stories. And that really got me thinking, there are so many cool stories. Let's figure out how to share even more. And that's just what we're doing. Now, as the hip historian, which is also my other moniker, I get to do a lot of fun things with Arizona history. And so right now I am just starting to do a deep dive onto an LGBT history of Phoenix book. So if you have any history, especially photos, let me know because I'm going to be looking for a lot of those photos. Also, earlier this week, went out to the Mesa History Museum to view a local artist, her work, which is permanently on display, Karen Kuykendall, and she was originally from Casa Grande, was where she started doing her art, and then it wound up here in Mesa. And it's quite spectacular. They're actually going to wind up being a guest on Happy Hour in the coming future. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then if any of you are watching Channel 15 today, you saw me and Kaylee talking about art and things you can do off of light rail. So get your family on light rail, go for an adventure, and go experience some art, some museums, and just learn more about the city, all without having to drive. All right. Now I see a couple of you. I see Pam is all the way coming into us from Mexico, from Chihuahua. Well, I'm so happy you're able to join us. And so, if you want to, you can always chat in this chat session. You can also reach out to me on the various socials, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, email, or even through my website. All right. So now we come to Little Arizona, which is where we get a chance to talk about a town that you might know a little bit about, but we do a little bit more on that. And so today we are talking about Page, Arizona, because coming up next month, I'm going to be doing some programs throughout the Maricopa County Library, throughout Maricopa County, at various libraries throughout the area, talking about movies in Arizona. And so Page began in the late 50s, really as a housing for camp workers who were building the Glen Canyon Dam. Now, it was originally traded for 24 miles of property owned by the Navajo for some larger tracts of land up in Utah. Now, for centuries, this land was considered sacred because of just the beauty of it. And so there's always been cultures kind of around that area. And so, if you go up today, you can take a little adventure on Lee's Ferry historical site. You can visit Glen Canyon Dam, as well as even Lake Powell. You can even, I know folks who've actually rented a houseboat, and you can go have a little vacation on Lake Powell. And when we talk movies, I think probably the most famous movie that's been filmed up there would indeed be Planet of the Apes, because it does look otherworldly. Now, part of that was because they took and flooded Glen Canyon. And so it's talked about how that was quite controversial. And really, for the Southwest, it was kind of the catalyst of the modern environmental movement for doing that. So, again, but it has some of the most spectacular sights that you might even see all around Arizona, from Horseshoe Bend to Antelope Canyon, which is those slot canyons where the water has really gone through and carved a canyon out from, instead of the top down, it's from the bottom up. And so those are quite spectacular. All right. And now with PJ, he was like, it is National Wine Day, so we are celebrating with some wine. So I am drinking Arizona Angel dark chocolate wine. Oh, and my green screen does not like that at all. So, but wine in Arizona is a rapidly growing industry. As you look around, as you travel around this summer, you'll be able to go visit all kinds of small festivals around the state celebrating wine, whether it's in Wilcox. You can always go up to Cottonwood and try some of those local wines, which keep getting better and better and better. And I'm happy to say now is a chance where you get to hear from someone else other than just me. And so I want to bring on my friend Neil. Hello.
Good evening.
How are you doing, Neil?
Doing great. I'm sitting over here in good old Tempe, Arizona, across the street from Gamage Auditorium.
Indeed.
Happy to be with you tonight.
I'm excited that you're here. So for folks that know much about you, tell us a little bit about yourself without giving any of the trivia away. That's the tricky part.
Okay. Yeah. Let me think about that. I've been in Arizona almost half a century, and I'm an ASU grad. Got involved in politics, taught at ASU, have been very active with a lot of events and activities here in the state of Arizona for a long period of time. And I'm very much an Arizona guy, although I was born and raised in a state back east.
Indeed. All right. So now here on Happy Hour, we do trivia, but we do our trivia a little different. So, if you're used to like bar trivia, it's all about what's the answer. Well, here we're not necessarily worried about what's the answer, because we are going to go through our questions that are all multiple choice. So if you don't know the answer, all you got to do is guess. And then at the end, we will go through and talk about those answers. And that's where I think all the fun really starts to happen, is when we start doing that. And so, all right. Now you can keep track of it. I know if Anita's watching, she likes to keep track of it. She's got a special notebook she uses. And, some folks keep track of in the chat session. So whatever makes you happy, you go for it. It's all good. All right. So our first question is, Neil's first elected office in Tempe was... A, was it school board? B, was it vice mayor? C, city council? Or D, all of the above? Indeed. Well, you know the answer, but I'm intrigued to see how many other people know the answer. All right. So moving on to question 2. The year Neil was elected mayor of Tempe was the same year as A, Nancy Kerrigan was attacked. B, Dolly the sheep was born. C, Alcatraz Penitentiary closes. Or D, Tiananmen Square protest. So what event, other than Neil being elected mayor of Tempe, happened that same year? All right. What 2001 event was Neil a part of? Did he come out as gay, for A? B, he won a recall election. C, bought a lottery ticket. Oh, bought a winning, not just bought a lottery ticket, but even more important, bought a winning lottery ticket. Or was he a speaker at the reopening of the Leaning Tower of Pisa? All right. So what event in 2001 do you think Neil was a part of? All right. Question 4. The reign of Tempe as the largest city in the U.S. with an LGBTQ mayor ended when who became mayor of where? And is it A, Pete Buttigieg and South Bend, Indiana? B, David Cicilline from Providence, Rhode Island? C, Jenny Durkin from Seattle? Or D, Jane Castor from Tampa? Which one of those people do you think bumped Neil from reigning as the largest city with an LGBTQ mayor? All right. Question 5. Who was the first openly gay LGBTQ elected official in Arizona? Was that A, Ken Chevront, B, Jack Jackson, C, Jim Colby, or D, Steve May? Who do you think was the first LGBTQ elected official that was open about that? All right. Question 6. The concept for Tempe Town Lake started where? A, Charles Hayden. B, the flood of 1978. C, an ASU class. Or D, a high school science fair. Interesting. All right. Question 7. ASU's communication department is now named for what Arizona celebrity? A, Pat McMahon. B, Hugh Downs. C, Paul Harvey. Or D, Bill Close? So who do you think the ASU communication department is now named for? All right. Question 8. How many miles are between San Francisco to Los Angeles? Is it A, 404, B, 445, it's like, or C, 545, or D, 645? So how many miles are there between San Francisco to LA? All right. And question 9. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance Anti-Defamation Awards recognize what categories? A, comic book, B, film, C, print, or D, all of the above? All right. And then question 10. Neil worked with which local celebrity? Was it A, Wallace, B, Alice Cooper, C, Stevie Nicks, or D, Pat McMahon? So what local celebrity do you think Neil worked with? All right. While you are locking in your final answers, we are going to take a quick Arizona music break. And so, since I thought we were talking about Tempe, I thought, let's talk about the Tempe sound. I mean, the museum, the Tempe History Museum, has a great job of, they did an exhibit a few years ago about the Tempe sound. And so they included places like Long Wong and so many other places that were just iconic to the Arizona sound, as well as music such as the Gin Blossoms. Now you can go on Spotify and they do have a Tempe Museum list of the Tempe sound, which include a wide variety of bands. They also do a really cool thing of bringing in bands on a regular basis to the museum itself. So it's well worth going and checking out and seeing what's on their website to see what they've got coming up. It's a great way to get out of the heat and to hear some cool music. All right, so now we're ready for some answers. All right. So Neil's first elected office in Tempe was
City
Council.
Yes, sir.
So you attended meetings in the Upside Down Pyramid.
I did. The Upside Down Pyramid little known fact, the upside down pyramid was almost at rural and southern in Tempe instead of in downtown Tempe. And the city council in the 60s, when they were figuring out what to do and where really the first main city hall would be, it was quite controversial at the time. And it was a 4-3 vote to put it at rural and southern. And then on the way from the one part of the meeting to the public part of the meeting, there was some pressure put to bear on a council member, and that council member shifted their vote to the downtown location where it's located. And the upside down pyramid was located in City Hall complex, was located in downtown Tempe. The pressure really came from the desire to create the downtown as a real sense of place and a destination. And having a city hall there was meant to be, create a more urban environment for the city hall rather than a suburban environment. And so the upside down pyramid is in downtown Tempe. It's really a great complex. It's actually called the Harry Mitchell Government Center.
Oh, I was in for Harry Mitchell.
Yes,
okay.
It was named for Harry. It was one of the first acts of my tenure as mayor. I followed Harry, was to name the government center complex after him. He had been a government teacher at Tempe High School for decades, and of course was the mayor for 16 years. And so we thought that would be an appropriate recognition for Harry.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. And what year was Neil elected mayor of Tempe? And it was also the same year as Nancy Kerrigan was attacked.
Right. 1994. Almost 30 years ago. So 29 years ago on May 10th, I was elected on May 10th, 1994. So next year will be the 30th anniversary of when I was elected mayor. It's hard to believe it's been that long ago, but it was that long ago. And
wow,
we're going to have a big party and do something. I don't know what yet, but it should be a fun time to really think back. And, it's fascinating and telling that I was looking at sort of my old sort of the list of people who were supporters and my campaign committee and so forth. And many of those people were in their 50s and 60s, 30 some years ago when they were, first supporting my campaign in late 1993 into 1994. And so many of the people who supported me when I first ran for mayor are no longer with us. So some friends and I were saying it's going to be a small party, going to be a small reunion, but we're going to do something and get some people together and just talk about those old times almost 30 years ago.
Wow. And as we'll talk about, and how Tempe and the Valley have just exploded since that point.
Yeah, it's not either, there's no such thing as staying the same. And certainly Tempe has changed and evolved over time. I look out my window here that looks north towards Gamage and downtown, and all of those tall buildings in downtown Tempe, none of those existed. None when I was first elected in 1994. So it certainly has changed and evolved. So it's a different place today, but I think it's still an amazing, incredible community, vibrant, diverse, so much going on, and offers so much for people, visitors and residents alike. So I'm pretty pleased with how it's turned out over the last 29, 30 years.
Indeed. All right. And so what happened back in 2001?
2001. It actually started in 2000. Some of your listeners might remember there was a Supreme Court decision in 2000 regarding the Boy Scouts of America that ruled 5-4 that they were a private organization and they therefore had the authority to privately choose their members and therefore could discriminate against LGBT community people, both as members of the organization or as advisors or leaders of the organization, right? They won that. And so that controversy led to a conversation about the city's campaign for raising funds for nonprofit organizations and social services through the city's United Way campaign. And it was my belief that you can't raise money for that's going to go through an organization that has a non-discrimination policy, and you can't give money to organizations that are legally allowed to discriminate. And but that led to a lot of controversy. The mayor hates the Boy Scouts. The mayor doesn't like the United Way. The mayor this and that. The gay mayor, actually, not just the mayor, the gay mayor. And so it led to, at the November 2000 election, people gathered signatures for a recall election at the polls at that day. And it was, all they had to do was stand there. Thousands of people went to vote. They got the signatures they needed to force a recall election. The recall election then was called for the following September. And the recall election was on September 11th. The September 11th, where there were municipal elections being held in Tempe, Mesa, and Phoenix that day. And it's a much longer story, but by 6:30 or so in the morning, we ceased the electioneering for the recall election on September 11th. I was paged with a pager. Remember those? Paged to come to City Hall immediately that there was a national emergency, and had a meeting and a conference call with the governor, Janet Napolitano at the time, and was working then with our local leadership, police and fire and city manager, to protect our water supply, protect our ports of entry, because we literally did not know, Marshall, what was going on in the United States in those first few hours on 9/11, after the two planes went into the World Trade Center and the plane was downed at the Pentagon. We really did not know what was happening in our country for a period of hours. And so we stopped campaigning, of course. And it was fascinating because no one was going to the polls, but the polls remained open. But all day long on the bottom of the television screens, we were all just transfixed at our televisions, watching the news on what was really going on. And all day long, the chyron at the bottom was polls remain open in Maricopa County for city elections and so forth. So nobody was voting at all until about 4:30 in the afternoon. And then the lines just went around the buildings. I think people sat home that day wondering what was happening in our country, wondering if we really were being attacked on many fronts, and wanted to make a stand for our democracy and support our way of life and our government and our freedom that day. And up until there's only one or two other elections, I think, in the history of Tempe that had a higher turnout than the local election on 9/11. And there were over 8,000 people that voted that day, of the 30,000 or so. I don't remember the actual numbers, 28, 30,000, that had never voted in a city election before. We looked at the data after the election. The election was like, and the lines were so long. We literally were getting calls saying there's hundreds of people in line at the Tempe Library. There's hundreds of people at line in South Tempe to vote. And we thought, we have no idea what's going to happen, because we didn't run a campaign that was reaching out to voters who had not voted in other elections. We thought this was going to be an election where the normal expected Tempe voter would participate. And over 8,000 people participated that day that had never participated in a city election. Fortunately, when the ballots came in that night, we won with 68% of the vote. But it was not a party, and it was still a very somber evening on 9/11, 2001. And, and then even the week thereafter and so forth, we learned that one of the pilots, one of the planes, had actually trained in Tempe, prayed in Tempe at the mosque right in downtown Tempe, and learned how to fly planes in Arizona. So there were so many things that were going on in the weeks after 9/11. It was probably the few weeks that were the sort of the heaviest burden, and where I felt the responsibility of being the mayor of the city more than any other time during the 10 years that I was the mayor.
Wow.
Yeah,
that was such a horrible day.
So
I mean,
horrible.
I actually wound up being at a dental appointment when it was all going down, and then wound up having lunch at Chompy's, which was full of New Yorkers.
Sure.
And so we're all just kind of commiserating over what we're
Yeah.
seeing on the screens.
Yeah. Yep. But a historic time for sure.
Indeed.
The recall election, the recall, we focused on the recall was wrong, and I should be retained as mayor. And fortunately, the voters agreed with that.
All right. So you were the largest city in the US with an LGBTQ mayor was you.
Yes.
And who knocked you off that hill?
It was David Cicilline, who had been a state legislator, ran for mayor of Providence. And at that time, Providence had about 15,000 residents more than Tempe, probably in the 185, 188,000 range. And so at the openly gay elected officials conference that year, and this is going back a long way, obviously, 20 years plus, there were probably not more than 60 or 70 of us at the conference, and that included guests and everything else. Now that conference literally has over 1,000 people at it every year. But we passed the crown to David, and Tempe was no longer the largest city in America with an openly gay mayor. It was David Cicilline, and Providence, Rhode Island got to wear that crown, and he carried the crown for a number of years as well. And now he just retired from Congress after, I think, 10 or 11 years in Congress. He's retiring, and he's taking a different job in Rhode Island as the CEO of the Rhode Island Foundation, very akin to our Arizona Community Foundation, the Rhode Island Community Foundation. So David's the new president and CEO of that after a very great career as a legislator, a mayor, and a member of Congress, and a good friend.
All right. Who was the first openly gay LGBTQ elected official in Arizona?
It was Ken. Yep, state representative Ken Chevron. Ken went on to serve 16 years in the legislature, 8 years in the House, 8 years as a state senator, and he's now a justice of the peace in the Central Phoenix area. So he's continuing a elected office and community service in that way as a JP.
All right. So, the Tempe Town Lake, which has changed the landscape of Tempe. Where did that idea or that concept originate?
Sure. It originated in an architecture class at Arizona State University in 1967. And
wow, 67?
Yep. The class was told by the dean of the school at the time, envision what the dry river bottom could be, right? And they came up with several scenarios, but the theme of all of the scenarios was somehow bringing water back to what had been a dry river bottom since the dams were built in 1901 to 1903, and dried up the real river, the flowing Salt River, right? And so they came up with that concept. 20 years later, in 1987, there was a ballot initiative in Maricopa County that would have raised a sales tax of 0.1%, with all of that funding to go to create this vision of a park system that would run 50 miles from Mesa all the way west to Buckeye, through Tempe and Goodyear and Avondale and Phoenix, of course. So, but the Maricopa County-wide initiative in 1987, the voters voted it down. They voted it down in all of the jurisdictions except one. The voters in Tempe voted yes. So Mayor Mitchell at the time and the city council at the time in 1987 said, we're going to keep talking about this. We're going to figure out something that we can do in Tempe. And I give them great, great credit for that. That kept it alive, right? And there's a Tempe Rio Salado Commission of Citizens and it kept being talked about and talked about and talked about, which was great. When I ran for mayor in 1994, really the primary thing I ran on was doing something about this idea. And I remember saying I did my campaign kickoff overlooking the dry river bottom, saying, we're going to do something with that down there. Y'all have been talking about this for a long time, like since 1967. It's now 1993. We need to figure out how to do something about this for our future. It reflected nearly 1/6 to 1/7 of the landmass of the Tempe's 37 to 40 square miles, right? The river bottom and a mile north and south of that through Tempe. We, as a landlocked city, we simply had to figure out a way to make that land productive for our future, right? You have no economic prosperity when you don't have an opportunity to create something with 1/7 of your landmass. And so we put the staff to the task and kept the citizens involved. So 67, it was talked about. 87, it was voted down everywhere except Tempe. In 1997, we were ready. And from the time I was elected in 94 till 97, we worked really, really hard on this. In 97, we started construction of Tempe Town Lake. And 2 years later, in 1999, the Tempe Town Lake opened. So that's how long the Tempe Town Lake has been around. And so it's been there quite a while now, as you might imagine, not quite 30 years, but over 20. And it really has performed for the community, not only for the community, but for all of Arizona. Tempe Town Lake is the second most visited site in the state of Arizona, behind what you may say, and of course that's an obvious answer, behind the Grand Canyon. But it's an attraction. Water in the desert is an attraction. And so the lake, the open space around the lake, following the lake, we sent a proposal to our voters for a short-term 1/10 of 1 cent tax to build the Tempe Center for the Arts on the banks of the lake, which the voters passed. And now we have the Tempe Center for the Arts there, all the public space. It was always going to be a mixed-use project with residential, with commercial, with open space. And we had one foundation principle about Tempe Town Lake, and that was this. That was that the actual perimeter of the lake front itself, would always have public access. So even a private sector project that was going to be built on the lake, they would not be able to claim they were on the lake. They had to be set back. And so you see around the lake, whether it's the State Farm project or Hayden Ferry or the condos and apartments on the north side of the lake, none of those have there's always space for the public on the perimeter of the lake, public access. And that was really important. That was one of the foundational principles for us, that we wanted the public to have access to the lakefront on the entire perimeter. And it's been a $2 billion economic boon for the city of Tempe and for Maricopa County and for the state of Arizona, all of which benefit from the jobs and the sales tax. And, you just have to go down there on the weekend to see the families that are having family picnics, and the number of proposals that have taken place on the West End footbridge and bike bridge over there. I mean, it's just a very picturesque and very amazing amenity for our region and for visitors alike. So very proud of it, and it's quite the place.
Yeah, and I was just chatting with some folks, and they were talking about the old mill that actually now looks like there's going to be some movement.
There is, yeah.
So which is quite exciting.
We acquired it a while back, and there's been a lot of fits and starts with working with private sector people to try to turn it into something that could make it really cool and really productive. And I think the city, last year, so they have a partner now who's going to make it happen, and I'm very thrilled to see that. For years, I just told folks, I could never get 4 votes on my council to just paint the thing and clean it up and paint it the way it was as the Hayden Flour Mill. Literally put the words Hayden Flour Mill back on it. But we could never get the support to do that. But it's a really exciting project. And for many years until it closed in the 90s, the flour mill was the longest continuously operated business in the state of Arizona.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, sure was. You could literally get flour from there.
Wow.
Yes, and it's going to be exciting when it gets the reuse and the energy that will come from igniting that street front on Mill Avenue from Rio Salado Parkway coming south in downtown is going to be really exciting. It's just a tremendous site. Really anxious to see what they do with it.
Yeah, and I think what a great way to kind of end May, which is Preservation Month.
Yes,
is actually talking a little bit about what the future of the mill, and that it's not going to be dismantled like so many other sites and things like that.
No, it's going to, everybody thinks of the silos when they think of the mill. The silos are the big concrete silos is one piece, but the actual building to the west of the silos was the actual mill. That's where it was, the flour was made, and it was stored in the silos. So both the mill building and the silos are being retained.
Yeah, which is really cool.
Yeah, very cool.
All right, so ASU's communication department is now named for what Arizona celebrity?
Hugh Downs.
And why do we care about ASU's communication?
My undergrad degree is from the ASU School, Hugh Downs School of Human Communication from 1979. It's kind of crazy because I'm coming up on so I'm 6 years away from my 50th golden anniversary as an Arizona State University alum. I realized that when I was walking on campus during commencement a few weeks ago, and I thought they had the big welcome class 50-year class reunion. I was like, oh my God, mine's coming up. How is that possible? But it is. Hopefully,
yeah, there'll be a banner with your year on it.
Yeah, there will be. That's in 1979. We're not far off.
So what got you from the East Coast to Arizona?
Well, my family moved here in 1973. My father had resigned from the Bloomfield City Council, where he was a city councilman, and moved the family west. And originally we were told it was because he had read Zane Grey novels and wanted to explore the West. It wasn't until years later, after he died, that my godfather told me the real reason that he abruptly resigned his city council seat and moved the family west was mob related. And he was not cooperating with the mob as an elected official. And essentially what I've been told is that they told him, you need to start cooperating with us, or, you really shouldn't be in this kind of a job. And he decided, you know what, I'm not going to be in this kind of a job. And he left the town where he was born and raised. He left his siblings and his parent, his mom, his grandmother. My grandmother was still alive at the time, and moved the whole family out here to Phoenix. They lived up at 3640 West Bloomfield Road by 35th Avenue in Cactus. And literally the end of the street was the end of the city. There was nothing from the end of 37th Avenue going west. It was a field. It was nothing at all. And we, of course, thought, oh my gosh, we're like living in the wild, wild west, right? We're out in the middle of nowhere, a couple blocks from Moon Valley High School. But I begged and pleaded, and my family let me stay in New Jersey for the end of my junior year and my senior year of high school. And then I moved out here, and I originally was going to go back to Rutgers to go to college. My father had some heart issues. My father was, Arizona people remember the Arizona Heart Institute and surgeon Ted Dietrich. He was an early era celebrity surgeon, right? He had written a book, and he was the one who created basically the bypass surgery. And my father was one of the first 100 heart bypass surgeries of Ted Dietrich. And it lasted 4 years, and my father died in 1978. So when I came out here after graduating high school, was going to go to Rutgers, and they said, oh, your father's not doing that well. He had the surgery by then. Said, you should just stay here. There's this college down in this town called Tempe. You should go check it out, and you should maybe go to that school. And I was like, are you kidding me? We're out in the middle of godforsaken nowhere. I'm going back to New Jersey to go to college. But one thing led to the other, and I stayed. I was a freshman. I moved into the dorm at Arizona State University on another historic day, on August 9th, 1974. Now, the hip historian, do you know what day that is in the history?
I don't.
It's the day Nixon resigned the presidency.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's the day I was moving into the dorm as a freshman. And, the rest, I mean, that was 1974. And then 20 years later, in 1994, I was elected mayor.
Wow.
So I guess it's good I stayed in Arizona. Didn't go back to New Jersey to go to college.
Indeed. So how long were you mayor?
I was mayor for 10 years.
Wow.
I did 3 2-year terms, and then the voters changed the term of office for mayor to 4 years, and I did 1 4-year term. And we don't have term limits in Tempe even to this day. And I was thinking of running for another 4-year term. And it looked like no one was going to run against me. This would have been in the 2004 election. And I woke up one day a few weeks before I thought I was going to announce my reelection. And I thought, I've been doing this for 10 years. There's got to be something else I can do. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what my future would be, but I'm not going to run for mayor again. I'm going to end at 10 years. We started the lake. We've done some things in downtown. We started a human relations commission. I sort of thought of the things that we accomplished in that 10 years. And I thought, you know what? It's time to be challenged again. It's time to do something new. Don't know what that's going to be, and I announced, to much chagrin and surprise to people, when I did my announcement, I announced that I was not seeking re-election. Instead of that, I was, and it surprised a lot of folks. But I think it was a great decision for me, and a good decision for the city. Change is good in political leadership, I believe, and so it all worked out just great.
Nice. All right. So how many miles are there between San Francisco to LA?
Well, the important caveat to this question, Marshall, is that you have to say by bicycle.
Okay.
There's probably a way to get there other than 545 miles, but 545 miles is the route that AIDS Life Cycle uses to go from San Francisco to LA, that benefits the LA Gay and Lesbian Center and the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. After I left office as mayor, I had the great privilege to be the president and CEO of GLAAD, which then was called the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. It's now just GLAAD. And I did that for about 4 years. I took some time off to write the book that I wrote, finish the book that I wrote, and then was recruited to be the CEO at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, which is the organization that puts on the AIDS Life Cycle ride every year with 2,500 or so riders that go from San Francisco to LA. And so I did that event 6 times and rode 545 miles every year, plus all the training rides and so forth. Raised a lot of money, and my Arizona friends were very, very generous to help me raise, over my 6 rides, raised over $250,000.
Wow.
For San Francisco AIDS Foundation during my tenure there as the CEO of San Francisco AIDS Foundation. So yes, it's 545 miles by bike.
Well, it's not like we're not known here to have some trick questions every now and then.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
So,
and I will say now, there is a great group of people in the Phoenix area who do the AIDS Life Cycle ride every year now. They call themselves the Hills Angels, and they are getting ready to the first week in June. It's always the first week in June. You just had the dates up there a minute ago. They're getting ready to travel to San Francisco with their bikes and do that 545 mile. There it is, June 4th to 10th, to do that same similar 545 miles. The route has to change every year a little bit based upon a city event here or something else, road work going on there. It's an amazing experience, and I'm honored to have been able to do it 6 years during my tenure as the CEO there.
Yeah, no, I've got friends here who do it as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. All right. So speaking of GLAAD, so they do awards every year. That recognize what?
It's all of the above, and then some. It's everything now.
Indeed, I could have had like a whole other list.
Exactly. And it's interesting. I was that GLAAD from 2005 to 2009 when social media was really just starting to take off. And there was a big conversation then about, well, gee, they really had traditionally just recognized film and print journalism, And there was a controversy and a big conversation. Well, what about this social media stuff that's doing LGBT stories? And should we give a GLAAD award for that? And it was at a meeting of my board of directors, there was a split decision. Oh no, that's not going to be real media, right? And now, of course, we know how it is. It's bigger than some others. That's not going to be real media. We have to stick to news, and we have to stick to, television and film. And of course, that was short-sighted, because social media and media in general is so many different forms now and deserves to be recognized by GLAAD and other organizations. But there was a thought at the beginning, it reminds me of a story when I was mayor. You'll appreciate this. I became mayor during that 10 years from 94 to 2004 was when cell phones became a thing. Right. And they came and they put the big brick cell phone on the console of the middle of my car, ran the wire up and everything. And the guy who was doing this said, this was all in a city car, and it was a city phone and everything. He said, "Hey, do you want me to save you a phone number, a cellular phone number for when, someday when you're not the mayor anymore, if you want to get your own cell phone?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, why would I ever want a phone outside of my office? When I'm not the mayor anymore, I don't need a phone in my car. I need a phone in my car now so the police or someone can reach me if there's an emergency, but I'm never going to need a phone outside of my car." And of course, the great news is he saved me a phone number that ends in 6,000, right? 6000, and the 602 and the middle number are also iconic, right? And people, lots of times when I have to call people the first time, they don't answer because they think it's a fake number.
Right.
Right. And they're like, "Oh, this must be a spam call or something." Because I have this number that, from the very beginning of when cell phones came out. But yeah, I told you, I'm not going to need it. Why would I ever want a phone outside of my office? I'm not going to need that. And of course, now we're tied to these things. Like it's such a part of our lives.
Exactly. And I mean, to the point now where so many folks don't even have a phone in their house.
I don't have a landline in my home.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, then that wasn't even that long ago, really, when you think about it.
Not really. No, but yeah, it's just funny to think about.
Indeed. And also, something else funny to think about is our last question.
Yes, Stevie.
So you worked with which local celebrity?
Yeah. So locals here will know that Stevie Nicks did several benefit concerts in Arizona. And I was hired to be her director of volunteers for the benefit concert. And mainly because I had ties to the university, and I could make a few phone calls and get, 20 volunteers from every fraternity and sorority to show up and work. Right. That's really the only reason they were using me. But it was really fun, and fun to work with the people that put the events on. This was at a place called Compton Terrace. Hopefully some of your folks watching will remember Compton Terrace. It was a great outdoor venue, obviously not in the summer, but a great outdoor venue for concerts. Not far. It was kind of in between Tempe and Phoenix. And so I was director of volunteers. Oh God, I must have weighed like 110 pounds. My hair was down to here, parted in the middle, a skinny little kid. And Kenny Loggins was working on those shows with her. And he thought it would be fun to tell everybody that I was his little brother that was volunteering. And I was this skinny little runt with hair just like his, parted in the middle. And so, we played that up for everybody, and people just believed it after a while. And Stevie was great and very gracious. I have a picture over on my wall over there to Neil, love Stevie. And great to work with and great fun. It wasn't like a full-time forever gig because she only did a few of these benefit concerts. But if anyone remembers those benefit concerts in the late 80s, she did them for the City of Hope because her friend had died of cancer, and she did it for the Arizona Heart Institute because her father, Jess Nicks, had had heart surgery there, like my father had had heart surgery there. And so they were great events, though. Anybody that's in my era, if you went to those Stevie Nicks concerts at Compton Terrace, they were epic. They were literally epic. Yeah, great experience.
Indeed. So, all right. Well, I always like to end asking people how they did in the trivia, but also just with the caveat of it's not necessarily how you did, but look at the stories. I mean, who knew that Tippytown Lake was proposed way back in the late 60s?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, Neil, what are you doing now?
Now I'm president CEO of a group called Greater Phoenix Leadership. Longtime Phoenicians will remember it first as the Phoenix 40. That was a group of businessmen at the time. Now it's very diverse and not just men, but it was the Phoenix 40 from 1974 till 1994. And in 1994, the board chair of the organization was this fellow named Jerry Colangelo, which some people may have heard of, who then owned the Suns and then the Diamondbacks. And he had a vision for it to be not just the Phoenix 40, but to expand it and to invite more CEOs to be involved, and more women to be involved, and people of color to be involved. And in the 94, it became Greater Phoenix Leadership. And a year from now, we're starting to plan already for our 50th anniversary as a business advocacy organization in Arizona, from the Phoenix 40 to Greater Phoenix Leadership, because next year we'll be 50 years old.
So what kinds of things have you all championed?
Oh, I call them the shuns. So education, transportation, we work on immigration, we work on water hydration, we worked on taxation issues. And then there's things like arts and culture. Right now we have an attainable housing task force that's working very closely in this region on workforce and attainable and affordable housing, because it's a huge issue for Arizona right now. Mm-hmm. We have a growing workforce, and we have less and less places for people to live. So it's a really, really significant issue. And so the CEOs come together and figure out, okay, here's an issue. Here's how we can help. Who's really doing good work in this area that we can support? We don't go out and say we're the experts. We know what the answer is to these problems. We will partner with the people in the community who are doing great work and addressing these issues, and bring to bear the capacity of 130 CEOs of Arizona's largest business enterprises to make Arizona a more prosperous and better place for the residents who live in Arizona. That's our mission. That's what we're here for.
Well, I mean, we're the fastest growing place in the country.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
So, yeah. And you're right. I mean, that basically accessible housing is a huge issue right now.
Housing's a big issue. Yes. Yep.
So, well, Neil, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your life, including Stevie Nicks and so many other passions of yours. And so, have a great holiday weekend.
Thank you. You too. And to all your viewers as well. Thanks for spending some time with us. I hope it was enjoyable for you, and stay in touch with the hip historian.
Thank you, Neil. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my gosh. Neil, thank you so much. That was so much fun getting to learn about Tempe and you a little bit more. So, okay. So now we are at From the Vault. And so, I thought what we could do is, so we're going to talk about if you go all the way out on Van Buren. So this weekend, we're actually doing a little bit of filming on kind of LGBTQ history of Roosevelt, kind of that, as well as kind of some other areas close by. But, Greenwood Cemetery, which is over on like 27th Avenue in Van Buren, literally right off the 17. I've done walking tours through there with private guests talking about some of the folks who were buried there. It's got an amazing array of history. And several years ago, I had a friend who brought to me from Greenwood, basically it was an empty plot, not an empty plot, but a unmarked plot that was for Nikolai Derelin, who was a 1906 Russian immigrant. When he moved here, he got himself a cushy job in Chicago, 2 wives, 1 divorce, and tuberculosis. And so from there, he wound up moving to Arizona, because back in the early early 1900s, people came here because of our dry air and clean air. And so he came here to try to combat tuberculosis, and it didn't work. And by the time they got to him, they realized, as they're ready for burial, that he had been born a woman. And so that caused shockwaves across the country. It was front page news above the fold from Bisbee to Australia. And so when I first found his plot, it was blank. And so we actually were able to raise funds through the community and got a headstone for Nikolai. And so, you know, I like to, it's such an amazing story. And that I'm trying to figure out how to get this in the book that I'm working on right now. So that's why I was like, okay, it's like right on my mind of how do we share this history? And, you know, as we keep sharing more and more stories, that's where the fun comes up. And so now you'll see why I always say, if you're watching on Facebook, click on that little share button down beneath, because we are having so much fun with Arizona history that you never know quite what's coming up next. And so next week, I'm so excited. So Lynn Downey, who was the archivist for Levi Strauss when I met her. And so we had great conversations about Arizona history and Levi's. But she has since moved on from that role, and she has written a book on dude ranches. So we are going to have a whole session on dude ranches, which is going to be so much fun. It's going to be a great episode that you won't want to miss. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. So that's next Thursday, 7 o'clock, same bat time, same bat places, wherever you are catching us. Now, you know, I love to hear from you all. That's why, I mean, whether you have questions, maybe you have some stories. Some folks have even said, hey, you know, what about this? Brought together and said, you know, we should bring somebody to the show that talks about this. Well, as we say goodnight, I always want to give a shout out to Chris and Cole, who did that great video, as well as PJ, who always keeps me up on date in terms of what's coming out in terms of booze and what should I be drinking and staying fresh on history. And as we say goodnight, we're actually going to say goodnight with the award, actually the Student Emmy Award winning piece that ASU Cronkite School did on Nikolai. So, all right, everyone, I will see you next week.
Imagine the way Arizona looked in the early 1900s. The streets, the people, with stories beyond the documented black and white.
People kept saying there was no history here.
But Marshall Shores sees history in color.
I'm known as Arizona's hip historian.
Also known as a local celebrity.
So I want to welcome you to Arizona History Happy Hour.
One of Marshall's friends, Erica Kempler, watched his audience skyrocket and said it's for a good reason.
He doesn't simply study history, he's actually trying to make a significant mark in it.
And Marshall made his footprint in history at Greenwood Cemetery in Phoenix, a lawn that celebrates the people who defined Arizona.
You can tell a lot about a city by going and visiting its cemetery and seeing its history.
To Marshall, each stone in Greenwood Cemetery represents a life with a story to share. But in the case of Nikolai DeRaylen, it was the absence of a headstone that made it so significant.
It's a really amazing story.
Nikolai DeRaylen visited Arizona to treat his tuberculosis.
It didn't go so well for him. He wound up passing away a few months later.
He left behind mounds of wealth and his beloved wife, Anna.
As they're ready for burial, they discovered that Nikolai was a woman. And so when they buried him here in Greenwood in 1906, they actually buried him in a dress and without a headstone.
Erica, who is also the founder of Arizona Trans Alliance, says his story is remarkable.
It really does say here's a person who managed to live a life with a tremendous secret that would have undoubtedly destroyed his life.
Nikolai had enough money to afford a traditional burial, but Marshall explained that his unmarked grave was a sign of disrespect.
Without a headstone, he was erased from time.
Then came an idea.
When I found out that we had a gender pioneer right here in Arizona from 1906, I started working with the local community to raise funds to get him a headstone.
It was really through his invitation I became a part of it.
They capitalized efforts through social media and word of mouth.
Going to bars and people giving money here, giving money there.
In 2 years, they raised over $3,000, but the question remained. What should it say?
It was my opinion that what we put on the headstone shouldn't be outing, should not out him as trans.
My friend Erica came up with this quote and I was like, oh my God, that is perfect.
A quote that speaks truth to Nikolai and the entire transgender community.
To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment.
Now the headstone stands among the masses, securing Nikolai's spot in Arizona's LGBTQ history.
So that's one of the things I try to give those marginalized communities a voice.
A contribution that also writes Marshall into Arizona's story. In Phoenix, Caitlin Keenahan, Cronkite News.